UFC 271, Adesanya vs Whittaker 2 takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main events, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, starting with the early prelim opener of Jeremiah Wells vs Mike Mathetha. Of course, this is the debut of Israel Adesanya's teammate, Blood Diamond. We've heard all about him. You might not have recognized him by me saying Mike Mathetha. You will recognize the name Blood Diamond. Israel Adesanya has been talking about him for a very long time. He's a welterweight. He was a kickboxer as well. Very talented, apparently, in kickboxing, according to Israel Adesanya. He now makes his debut against very, very dangerous Jeremiah Wells, who's got knockout power, just beat Wale Alves, was supposed to be fighting Jake Matthews on a similar card around this time. It got moved. They've switched around a bunch of matchups. Now he's taking on Blood Diamond in his debut. And in my opinion, I reckon Jeremiah Wells is going to score a first-round brutal KO over Mike Mathetha, who's a good kickboxer, don't get me wrong, but I've watched his kickboxing bouts. This is not like Israel Adesanya coming over. This is not like Alex Pereira coming over to make his debut. This guy, call me a casual all you want, I've watched his kickboxing fights. First of all, the opponents aren't all that good. And second of all, he looks really terribly bad. Really bad, really clumsy, all over the place. He does have good power and he does land good KOs now and again. He's got great head kicks and stuff like that. But typically in the early parts of these fights in his kickboxing bouts, he looks all over the place. And I'm not saying that Jeremiah Wells is the level of kickboxer that Mike Mathetha is. However, he is an explosive man with KO power that can switch the lights off immediately in these bouts, and he's more experienced, and he's probably a better grappler as well. Now, Mike Mathetha is training at CKB, so he's going to have a lot of success, but we saw that Carlos Ulberg, in his debut against Kennedy Nzechukwu, there was a bunch of hype on him, a bunch of pressure to perform. He's called Blood Diamond. Israel Adesanya's been talking about him for the past however many months or years, and now it's his big time, opening up the card in the UFC on a pay-per-view event. I reckon it's going to be too much for him, and Jeremiah Wells is going to score a brutal first-round KO immediately. I like Mike Mathetha. I like the name Blood Diamond. I hope he succeeds after this, but I think this is a worst-case scenario debut opponent. Out of any of the unranked opponents you could have gotten, like around the similar level that most people would make their debut against, Jeremiah Wells is not the guy you want to be taking on, and I reckon he can mix up the grappling and also that explosive power in the first round on a guy who has so much hype to deliver on in his debut in Mike Mathetha. I see this as a first-round KO for Jeremiah Wells. Moving on up the card, Douglas Silva the Andrade versus Sergey Morozov. I'm going with Sergey Morozov here. I like Douglas Silva the Andrade. I picked him in his last fight against Guillertino Perillo. He got a brutal KO there, but I only picked him against Guillertino Perillo because I knew that Guillertino Perillo was not the best fighter in the world, let's just say. Douglas Silva the Andrade is very good, but he loses to Lerone Murphys, Piotr Jans, Rob Fonts. Not bad names to lose to, don't get me wrong. Really good names to lose to. But I think the difference here is he's beating Henan Barao at that point in his career by decision. He's beating Guillertino Perillo, and he's not really a KO artist. Like, this is his first KO since 2016 against Henry Briones. I'm not going to trust him to get a KO here against Sergey Morozov, and if this does go to a decision, I can see the grappling of Sergey Morozov, along with his good striking as well, being enough to compete on the feet with Douglas Silva the Andrade, and also the grappling that he's going to mix in, that he looked great in against Umar Nurmagomedov. Umar Nurmagomedov's a great grappler, and Sergey Morozov gave him a couple of really good scrambles in that fight, so I think if he mixes in the grappling, he's going to have a much better time against Douglas Silva the Andrade, and I think that Douglas Silva the Andrade, who is a guy who usually does slow down in fights, is going to slow down a little bit more because of the high grappling pressure from Sergey Morozov, who's a very, very, very good fighter himself. I know you just watched him get dominated by Umar Nurmagomedov with a couple of good moments, but he beat Khalid Taha, who's a very good fighter himself. He beat a bunch of good guys at the M1 Challenge, Josh Rettenhouse, Alexander Ostratov, 5-0, a 6-0 guy, 7-2, 11-4. I like anyone who comes through M1 Challenge, so I'm going to ride with another M1 fighter. He lost to Movsar Evloev. He beat the guy he originally lost to in Josh Rettenhouse. I reckon this guy's got what it takes. M1 produces great fighters, great grapplers as well. And I think if he uses his grappling, he can slow down the older man who's all fast twitch muscle in Douglas Silva the Andrade and wear him out to maybe a third round rear naked choke finish is what I'm going to go for. Moving on up the card to another great fight, which is Jacob Malkoun versus AJ Dobson. I'm actually going to go with Jacob Malkoun here because I was wrong about him. I saw him sort of shit the bed in his debut and get KO'd really badly. But after that, he had a very good performance and showed really good grappling against Abdulrazak Alhassan. Now, Phil Hawes, a bigger opponent in the middleweight division, very good matchup for him. And he gets the KO in the first round against Jacob Malkoun on short notice. But now we come back to middleweight. He just out-grappled Abdulrazak Alhassan. Very good performance there, and I think that Abdulrazak Alhassan is better than AJ Dobson. I know AJ Dobson's from the Contender Series, and there's a lot of hype behind him right now, but Jacob Malkoun, a little bit more experienced. He's had his debut in the UFC. It's gone terribly wrong. It can't go possibly worse than that for him in his own head, so he's going to be more confident in those early rounds, and I think AJ Dobson, who's a bit of a fast starter, that goes all over the place and gets really crazy, I think that Jacob Malkoun can use that grappling that he showed against Abdulrazak Alhassan and use a very Whittaker camp-based game plan of sticking to the game plan, not getting too crazy early on, and shooting a great takedown on AJ Dobson, and just calming down the early part of this fight, and eventually starting to take over as it goes on with his grappling. He's very tough. I know he got KO'd by Phil Hawes, but he's a very explosive guy, Phil Hawes. Same with AJ Dobson, but I think he's going to learn from that. He's got over his octagon jitters, and again, AJ Dobson making his UFC debut on a pay-per-view card. There's a lot of pressure there. I could see Jacob Malkoun getting cracked in an exchange, Dobson going all out on him, trying to get a first round KO, Malkoun timing a perfect double leg takedown, pinning him to the mat, getting half guard, and just sort of keeping him there and controlling him the same way he did his last opponent in Abdulrazak Alhassan, who I do believe is more dangerous than AJ Dobson. But Dobson's good, very impressive. He has been taken down and submitted before by John Gunther in his career, but other than that, 6-0 as a pro, hasn't beat the best of opponents. I'm going to go with Jacob Malkoun. That win over Abdulrazak Alhassan means a lot to me, so I'm taking him to get the upset here against AJ Dobson, and I think Dobson's debut is going to build a lot of nerves and pressure in that early round that's going to lead to him missing a lot of positions on the ground. Moving on up the card, Carlos Ulberg versus Fabio Cherant. I'm going to go with Carlos Ulberg here. The only way I see Fabio Cherant winning is if he out-grapples Carlos Ulberg. Don't see that happening whatsoever. I don't see him out-striking Carlos Ulberg. I mean, Ulberg can be maybe like gassed out if he like beats you up enough like he did Kennedy Nzechukwu, and honestly his power might not be too crazy because Kennedy Nzechukwu got KO'd from a shot that landed on his forearm by Dao Eun-Jung, the same Dao Eun-Jung that went to a draw with Sam Alvey and couldn't finish him. So Nzechukwu's chin isn't the best, but neither is Fabio Cherant's. We saw him got slept by William Knight from like the weakest wrist punch that you could imagine. Fair play, he didn't see it coming, but he rushed him really badly. He got dominated by Alonzo Menifield. So many of those first round dominating victories for his opponents. Fair enough, you get slept in the first round once, but you get ragdolled to the ground and choked out easily in a fight, and then you get slept in the first round. Maybe he's not quite ready for this level of competition. I'm going to go with Carlos Ulberg here. I think he gets this one done by first round TKO, by just being too much on the feet for Fabio Cherant. I can see Cherant losing this fight for a while. Ulberg chopping at the legs, trying to be a bit more of an investor in this fight rather than headhunting the entire time. Then Cherant tries to close the distance, and I think Ulberg's going to catch him coming in again and put him down in the first round by TKO. Ulberg gets this one done. Moving on up the card, Alexander Hernandez versus Renato Moicano. Great matchup. Could be on the main card of the pay-per-view. No idea why it's on the early prelims and not even headlining the early prelims. It's actually an embarrassment and an insult to these two fighters that they're this low down on the card. No idea why they've done this, but this is the UFC. They make no fucking sense. I'm going to go with Alexander Hernandez. I'm going to trust him. He's got momentum right now. Renato Moicano has not got the best chin in the world. He's got good stand-up himself, and he's got good grappling. I don't see him out-grappling Alexander Hernandez. Hernandez, although people like to shit on him, has really good grappling, and I think he'll do well in the early rounds at least to keep this standing. And I think he can have what it takes to go out there on the big stage. Not too much pressure because it's on the early prelims compared to the main card that it would have maybe normally been on. So I think he's going to come in there, under the radar, land the first round KO on Renato Moicano with great speed. I think this is going to be an amazing card full of finishes, so I'm going with Alexander Hernandez. Very good grappling on both their ends. Moicano's probably got an advantage if it gets into those second and third rounds, but don't trust his chin, man. I'd never trust Renato Moicano's chin. And Jai Herbert, the last guy he beat, was very malnourished and had no strength whatsoever. Hernandez is a little tank of a man in the lightweight division, a very big lightweight as well, and I think he's going to tag Renato Moicano in the early rounds and put him away in the first by KO. Alexander Hernandez gets this one done. Moving on up the card, Ronnie Lawrence versus Mana Martinez. I'm going to be going with Ronnie Lawrence here. Mana Martinez, a very capable fighter himself. I don't even know if he should be in the UFC at this point, but they've given him a chance. He beat Guido Canetti by split decision. It's Guido Canetti, and arguably you could have lost that one as well, so please beat Guido Canetti, 8-5, 36-year-old, a little bit more convincingly than split decision. Ronnie Lawrence looked really good in his last fight on the Contender Series, or in his debut in the UFC against Vince Cachero. Got a third round TKO there. Vince Cachero, very capable fighter, beat Draco Rodriguez, who defeated Mana Martinez in the first round on their Contender Series fights to even get into the UFC on the first place. But Mana Martinez has worked his way back up. I just don't think he's going to be beating Ronnie Lawrence. Guido Canetti was giving him all sorts of problems, and he don't move like Ronnie Lawrence. Ronnie Lawrence moves very well, very unorthodox footwork. If Mana Martinez can't figure out a simple, basic opponent in Guido Canetti, I don't see him beating a Rubik's Cube puzzle of a Ronnie Lawrence. I think Ronnie Lawrence is going to confuse him, mix in the grappling, land some good shots on the feet as well. There's always a chance that Ronnie Lawrence gets KO'd because he does rear out of exchanges with his chin way up in the air. But I'm going to say that Mana Martinez isn't going to get a KO immediately. He hasn't got a first round KO since his debut in his pro career. So I'm going to go with Ronnie Lawrence, out-grappling him and getting the job done that way, mixing in the takedowns every round, and just putting a pace on Mana Martinez that he can't keep up with to a unanimous decision win. I'll say 30-26, unanimous decision to Ronnie Lawrence. Moving on up the card to another amazing fight that's taken place, which is William Knight versus Maxim Grishin. I'm going to go with William Knight. He's on roids, blatantly. Got gyno on one side in the middle of his 30s. No puberty on one side, so it's not like natural gyno. It was a massive lump of gyno as well. It wasn't just like a... Sorry, I just smacked the microphone there. It wasn't like a lump of just a little bit of a puffy nipple out of nowhere. It was like immediately a massive lump of gyno out of nowhere on one side, nowhere near puberty, whilst he's a professional athlete that stays in massively amazing shape all year round. I think he's definitely on roids. Maxim Grishin doesn't look like he's on roids. I'm going to trust in William Knight to win this one based on that fact. And also, just looking at William Knight, maybe you could argue that Maxim Grishin could out-grapple him and wear him down as the fight goes on and get him to the ground. But when you watch William Knight in some of these transitions, the guy is like really weirdly athletic in these positions to take mount, to scramble. We saw it against Alonzo Menifield, a very close fight against Alonzo Menifield, but you saw every time William Knight touched Alonzo Menifield, he worried about it. Grishin's had a very long career, a veteran's career, where he's taken a lot of damage as well. I can see William Knight landing that KO blow, stuffing a couple of takedowns early. Grishin tries to exchange on the feet. William Knight gets a first round brutal KO, followed up with some ground and pound afterwards, and finishes off Maxim Grishin in the first round. I think this is going to be an amazing card. William Knight first round KO. He's on roids, definitely. No way around that. I don't see any other way that can be. He's on roids. There's no way around it. And I think his grappling is good as well. So I don't see any way that Grishin can take this to avoid that dangerous KO power. I'm going with William Knight by first round KO. Moving on up the card, Alex Perez versus Matt Schnell. I'm going to go with Alex Perez. I just don't trust Matt Schnell's chin in that division. And watching him get outstruck by Rodrigo Bontorin, it's not a good look when you're coming up against Alex Perez. I don't see Matt Schnell being able to out-grapple Perez. And also, Matt Schnell, for a guy who did so much jiu-jitsu early in his career, he seems to have fallen in love with his hands. Maybe he comes out there this time and mixes it up completely and changes his style to go for a bit more of a grappling-heavy approach. But I just think he's going to fall in love with his hands, try and box with Alex Perez. And I think Perez is also going to box better than him on the feet and mix in those nasty calf kicks as well on Matt Schnell. And I think he wins this one by decision. I'll say 30-27 Alex Perez. Reasonably entertaining fight over the 3 rounds. Matt Schnell might have some moments where he lands a couple of good fast combinations with his hands. But in between all of that, Perez is going to be chopping at the calf, landing good kicks, and landing good combinations at range. Perez is a very underrated guy for that division. Sure, he got guillotined by Davison Figueiredo and beaten by Joseph Benavidez. But if you watch that Joseph Benavidez fight, it's straight up an illegal finish. over and over again back of the head shots. Other than that, he's beaten Jussier Formiga, Jordan Espinosa, Mark De La Rosa, Jose Torres, which is a very underrated win in my opinion by first round KO, and Eric Shelton, who's a great grappler. So I'm going to trust in Alex Perez to keep this standing and school Matt Schnell on the feet for 3 rounds to a 30-27 unanimous decision win. Moving on up the card, Roxanne Modaferri versus Casey O'Neill. I'm going to be going with Casey O'Neill here. Pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. You can't really pick Roxanne Modaferri if I'm honest. Casey O'Neill's got good grappling. She's got good stand-up. Her stand-up is like women's flyweight level, but still good stand-up for a women's flyweight. Like, still looks like she's drunk, like a drunk toddler, but, you know, for a women's flyweight, that goes a long way, that level of striking. Weirdly, in this sport where they deserve more money. Either way, 8-0. Experienced, had an amateur career, trains at a good gym, improving every time in my opinion. Her stand-up isn't the best, as I said. I don't see Roxanne Modafferi's stand-up being any kind of problem for her though, because Roxanne Modafferi again is blind out there half of the time and has no idea what she's doing. It's her last fight on her contract. Casey O'Neill was hungry to go towards a title shot and she's only just started her career. She's undefeated. Whereas Roxanne Modafferi, if there's a chance to not take as much damage and lose, that's in her favour, and she'll probably take that opportunity to just not get KO'd if it just means she's going to lose, you know what I mean? Because it's her last fight on her contract. She's not exactly going to get towards a title shot. She's going to finish after this anyway, so I'm going to trust in Casey O'Neill's mindset, her hunger, her grappling as well. We just watched Roxanne Modafferi, I believe, get rocked on the feet by Viviane Araújo, and also out-grappled in that fight as well. I'm just going to double-check that right now. It was Taylor Santos, not Viviane Araújo, but we watched her get that done to her against Viviane Araújo as well. In her last 2 fights, Viviane Araújo, Taylor Santos, they both rocked her on the feet and they both controlled her on the ground. I reckon Casey O'Neill is not going to destroy her on the feet, but I think that she's got a better chin than Roxanne Modafferi, whose chin is a little bit spent for a women's MMA fighter in my opinion, getting rocked quite a bit by jabs and shit like that. So I'm going to trust in the grappling of Casey O'Neill to get this one to the ground and control her in half guard and probably get a TKO win in the second round by ground and pound to Casey O'Neill. I'm going to go for second round ground and pound. Casey O'Neill gets this one done, takes full mount, lands big shots, takes the back, lands big shots, finishes the fight without a rear naked choke, just with strikes. Casey O'Neill gets this one done. Moving on up the card, Andrei Arlovski versus Jared Vanderaa. I'm going to go with Arlovski here. Again, I think this is a pretty straightforward pick. What a tapology picking on this one. 88% Andrei Arlovski, so they're just Hail Marying that maybe Vanderaa has a chance of winning. I don't see Vanderaa winning this one. Arlovski's looking amazing in the heavyweight division, and in hindsight, you actually do have to be something really special to beat Andrei Arlovski. Tom Aspinall, Jairzinho Rosenstruik, Augusto Sakai. Arlovski arguably won that fight, so I'm not even going to count that one. Walt Harris, no contest. Shamil Abdurakhimov, whatever. Still a top-ranked heavyweight at the time. Coming up, that was all the way back in 2018. Tuivasa only won by very, very narrow margins against Andrei Arlovski as well. Then you've got Stefan Struve, who he beat. Junior Albini, who he beat. And Ngannou beat him. Josh Barnett, Alistair Overeem, Stipe Miocic, Martin Tybura. These are all good names in the heavyweight division. Really, really solid, great names. And I think he beats the rest of them. The Tanabosas, which arguably he could have lost, but still he made it razor close. The Felipe Lins, the Chase Shermans, the Carlos Felipes. I thought he won all of those fights, other than maybe the Tanabosa one. But Jared Vanderaa is on that level, in my opinion, if not worse than those guys, because he just takes damage. He just got absolutely obliterated by Alexander Romanov, which is really bad damage to take to turn around 4 months later for another fight. So I reckon I could see Andrei Arlovski picking him apart to a decision. Maybe Jared Vanderaa tries to grapple with him but can't quite get takedowns, lands a couple of decent shots on the feet. I reckon Andrei Arlovski is veteran enough to use his striking etiquette to beat and pick apart Jared Vanderaa on the feet for 3 straight rounds, 30-27. But Vanderaa is dangerous. He has some weird techniques on the feet that can work. I just think at this level of competition, Arlovski's going to be able to beat the level of opponent that Jared Vanderaa represents, which is a bottom feeder heavyweight that arguably shouldn't have even got this fight in the first place. So I'm going to go with Andrei Arlovski. Maybe he mixes in his own takedowns because of how bad the takedown defense of Vanderaa has looked. So he has that option if he needs to, if he doesn't like it on the feet. But I can see him winning this on the feet for 3 rounds to a 30-27 decision. Moving on up the card to another great fight which takes place, which is Nasrat Haqparast versus Bobby Green. We're on the main card now. I'm going to go with Bobby Green here over Nasrat Haqparast. Nasrat's good. but we've seen him sort of get beaten by that next level guy in the lightweight division. I think Bobby Green, look at the Fiziev fight in hindsight. I think Bobby Green has always been a top level guy, a ranked level contender in the lightweight division. And he's arguably been robbed in a lot of his losses that he's had. Rafael Fiziev, that's a very close fight. I don't think it's a robbery. I think it can go to Fiziev. But if they raised Bobby Green's hand, I actually wouldn't have minded that decision. It was extremely close, all based on perception, damage versus volume. So I'm going to go with Bobby Green here, because you look, he beat Thiago Moises very convincingly, in my opinion. He beat Francisco Trinaldo, but that one was scored against him as well. I thought he could have beaten Drakkar Klose, but that was scored against him as well. Rashid Magomedov, I thought he arguably could have won that one. It was scored against him. Also, Dustin Poirier, he lost by first round KO, but the Barboza fight, Barboza landed the better shots, but again, Bobby Green outlanded him in those rounds. Bobby Green on the feet is a very, very dangerous man, and I just don't see Nasrat Haqparast having any other option than to stand with him, and that's right into Bobby Green's game. No takedown threat for Bobby Green. He's gonna tune him up on the feet, I reckon. Bobby Green gets this one done. I hope he's motivated to go out there and win. And also, Nasrat lost his family last time. It lost his mum and some other members of his family as well. Bobby Green, nothing going on in his life that I know of. I'm going to go with Bobby Green, picking apart Nasrat Haqparast on the feet. Nasrat's a little bit one-dimensional with his boxing. We saw he couldn't really find range on Dan Hooker too well, and Hooker was even able to walk him down in certain moments. Hooker should be the guy backing up quite a bit in that lightweight division, you know what I mean? You should have to come to him and close the distance on him. But Dan Hooker was going into close range and beating Nasrat there in certain moments of that fight. So I don't like the range control of Nasrat. I'm going to go with Bobby Green. I think he's too adept on the feet, and I think he wins this one by decision, 29-28. Very close fight, but Bobby Green will wedge it out and pick apart Nasrat in certain rounds to win this one by unanimous decision. I think the third round could be a 10-8 as well for Bobby Green. Moving on up the card to another fight on the main card. Kyler Phillips versus Marcelo Rojo. I'm going to go with Kyler Phillips, but Tapology has 93% Phillips, 7% Rojo. I don't like that, because Marcelo Rojo is very, very good, and he had a very good performance against Charles Jourdain on short notice in his debut before starting to slow down as the fight went on. He's very dangerous, extremely dangerous, but I still don't think it's good enough to beat Kyler Phillips. Kyler Phillips is very good. He can mix in the grappling. I think his last fight against Raulian Paiva is going to be a massive learning performance for him to not gas out and go for broke to get a finish in the early rounds. On a patient day, Kyler Phillips can beat Song Yadong. That's what I know. I don't know who Marcelo Rojo can beat on his best night. We haven't really seen evidence of that, so maybe he could. But I'm going to go with Kyler Phillips. The evidence is in his favour. He had a bunch of great performances. Even against Raulian Paiva, it should have been a draw. I don't see how that first round is not scored a 10-8, so I have no idea how Raulian Paiva got that win. Either way, he beat Song Yadong. He destroyed Cameron Else in their fight as well. He had some great performances in his debut against Gabriel Silva, and even before that against Mika Lefakandu as well, who was 6-2, beat him in the first round with a head kick. Very explosive early on, which I think is going to make Marcelo Rojo hesitate a little bit. And also, I think if he stays composed and doesn't empty the gas tank early and respects Marcelo Rojo as a good opponent, I think he can just tune him apart for 3 rounds. But I'm actually going to go with Kyler Phillips decision. I'll go decision, 30-26. I think he does drop Rojo in the first round and hurt him bad, which makes Rojo a bit more patient later on to not put the pressure on him. But I don't think he's going to chase the finish so much. I think he'll just drop him badly, land a couple of shots. Rojo will survive, so he'll let him back up and just get back to work on the feet. I'm going to go with Kyler Phillips by decision here. Moving on up the card to another amazing fight, which is Jared Cannonier versus Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson, you fucking cunt. I'm going to pick against him again. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck if he's blonde. Cultural appropriation, my ass. I don't give a fuck. I'm going to go with Jared Cannonier here. I think he's going to KO Derek Brunson. He's got good... Listen, Cannonier is really surprising for the guy that he is. He's very explosive, but he also has really good cardio and really good conditioning, and he can take a beating, and he can go 5 rounds well, and he can also defend takedowns as well. So, I don't know why I just said as well twice, but either way, Cannonier, I reckon, has the recipe to beat Derek Brunson. I think Till has the recipe to beat Derek Brunson, but he just didn't train and look like a fat slob in that fight. Cannonier is not a fat slob. I think he has similar levels of takedown defense to Darren Till, but he's not a fat bitch like Darren Till, who don't even show up in shape. So I'm going to go with Cannonier being in shape, being ready for his title shot. Brunson's had a very busy schedule. He's an older guy. I'm sure he might be picking up some injuries that he's just ignoring to get through it and just make sure he gets his title shot. So I'm going to trust in Jared Cannonier. He showed great grappling defense against Jack Hermansson. Good grappling and defense against David Branch as well. David Branch got him down a couple of times, but he worked his way back up, stayed patient. He never gave up positions like full guard on the ground or half guard on the ground or full mount, which is where Brunson does his best work in my opinion. So I'm going to say that Cannonier stays patient, works his way up against the cage if he does ever get taken down, and makes that his home. Stays against the cage if Brunson's looking for a takedown, works his way back up to one knee every time, and Brunson, I think, is going to start to slow down from failing his takedowns early on, and I'm going to call a third round KO win with a left hook from Jared Cannonier. Maybe Brunson controls him in the first round, but I think Cannonier's going to land knees in the clinch, couple of punches to the face of Brunson. I just don't think Brunson on the feet after failing some takedowns is going to be safe against a guy like Jared Cannonier. So I'll go with Jared Cannonier, left hook KO, third round. But Brunson, please prove me wrong. I dare you to try and get a title shot in 2022 as your old self. It would ruin the credibility of the UFC middleweight division for good, and I'm all for it at this point because why fucking not? I'm looking forward to a Derek Brunson Glover Teixeira super fight in 2023. Let's get things going, but I'm not picking him. I'm staying to my guns. This guy does not belong here, and he's a matter of circumstance. Cannonier will sleep him in round 3. He better do, otherwise I'll be having another mental breakdown of mine. Cannonier's got good grappling defense, good cardio over 3 rounds. I think he's going to catch him. And he looked good against Whittaker as well and people like that. And even in that Whittaker fight, Whittaker had his back. Even while Cannonier had one eye and a bad forearm and was rocked, he managed to escape that position and work his way back up. And even rock Whittaker at the end of that 3rd round. So I think Cannonier's going to chop at the legs of Brunson. That's going to stop the takedown effectiveness of Brunson because he's going to be wounded and injured going into those takedowns, and I think that will lead to Cannonier capitalizing as the fight goes on with a big KO. Moving on up the card, Derek Lewis versus Tai Tuivasa. I'm going to go with Derek Lewis here over Tai Tuivasa. I like Tai Tuivasa. I want Tai Tuivasa to win. Derek Lewis has the power advantage, and they're going to slug it out in the center of the cage. Now, maybe Tuivasa has some hand speed advantage, but Chris Daukaus had the hand speed advantage. I would say Daukaus is faster than Tuivasa. Tuivasa is a little bit more powerful and maybe a bit more durable. But in my opinion, it doesn't matter how durable you are when you're going up against Derek Lewis. You can be 5% more durable than Chris Daukaus. The result will be the same. If Lewis lands a flush punch, you're going down. And I think that Tai Tuivasa saw him get rocked against Greg Hardy. I'm rooting for him wholeheartedly. He's one of my favourite fighters on the roster. I think maybe one of the most authentically funny and great personalities on the entire roster. I remember he was on an Embedded episode before, and he stole the entire show of the Embedded episode. So I can't wait for Embedded this week, which should be coming out tomorrow, which I look forward to. I just don't think Tuivasa's got any options. He might be able to chop at the calves, but then you're going to have to be in very close range with Derek Lewis. And that's where Greg Hardy tagged him with that right hand. Derek Lewis can tag him with that same shot as well. I'm going to go with Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa. Scrapping back and forth. I know the last Samoan guy that looked a bit like Tai Tuivasa beat Derek Lewis in Mark Hunt, but I think Lewis is improving. His grappling is improving. His overall health and injury status is improving. He always used to have some kind of injury going into a fight because of his training, but I think he's trimmed down a little bit, leaned up a little bit, and he wants to avenge himself after that embarrassing loss to Cyril Gane. And if he beats Tai Tuivasa, he's going to be in a great position to look towards that title as well because, again, he has a win over Ngannou, which is massive. And if I'm Ngannou and I want a perfect legacy, I want to beat a guy like Derek Lewis to remove that loss off my record. So Derek Lewis is motivated. He's got a quick turnaround. He took barely any damage against Chris Daukaus, so he's going to be fresh early for a quick first round of action. Tuivasa took Spivak into the second. I don't think Lewis takes Spivak into the second. Let's just say that. And I think if Spivak can escape the first round against Tai Tuivasa, Lewis can as well. I'm going to go with Derek Lewis, first round KO after a crazy back and forth. Oh, and then Tuivasa's down. That kind of fight is going to go down in my opinion. Derek Lewis, first round KO. Moving on up the card. Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker 2, the rematch. I'm going with Israel Adesanya. It's a good underdog pick for Robert Whittaker 2, but Israel Adesanya's on roids and it's tough to pick against that, and I hate I hate that that sits in my mind when I'm trying to make a prediction. He's on roids. We all know he is. Gyno on one side, nowhere near puberty. Professional athlete in peak condition all year round. No obesity, no puberty, no double-sided, no slight puffiness, immediate breast. He blamed on weed in the middle of a global pandemic. I'm going to make an expose video on him as the week goes on, probably closer to the fight date. I can't pick it. I can't pick against him. Can't pick against him. Dude's roided to the gills. I'm going with Robert Whittaker. I'm not going with Robert Whittaker. I'm going against Robert Whittaker. I'm picking Israel Adesanya here. I just think he's going to be too good. Too good for him. Land leg kicks at range, like the style bender that he is. Mixing those styles together very well by standing out of range with his reach advantage and spamming leg kicks over and over again on Whittaker. We saw that Whittaker, even though he is winning these fights that he's going into, the Gastelum performance was amazing. But again, Gastelum on short notice does need to be taken into consideration here. But again, he beat Kelvin Gastelum. Very good performance there. One of his better performances. The Darren Till fight was extremely close. And that tells me technical strikers make Whittaker not be able to just destroy them. Okay? Like, he destroys Kelvin Gastelum because Kelvin Gastelum is a scrappy, not very technical, brawly striker that tries to close the distance and throw bombs. Whittaker beats that level of striker. Slow, patient, methodical, range-keeping striker in Darren Till did very well in that fight after a torn ACL in the first round against Robert Whittaker. He won the first round. He arguably could have won the fourth round, but lost the fifth due to takedowns at the end and a couple of more shots that Whittaker landed, and also the third based on a couple of more shots that were landed as well. Darren Till had a very close fight with him, staying at range, keeping range well, and it confused Whittaker a bit, and he couldn't tee off the way he normally could when a guy rushes forward at him. I think Adesanya is going to take it patient, stay at range, chop at the leg of Robert Whittaker, and let's not forget, Cannonier played that same game, stayed patient, stayed at range, didn't rush in like Gastelum to crowd the fight and make a big KO happen, and he did very well against Whittaker too. Arguably could have won that first round, lost the second and third, arguably could have lost the first as well in all honesty, but Cannonier stayed at range, slowed down the fight, made it more patient, and that led to a much more competitive bout than Gastelum had against Whittaker, like he and Till did with that slow, methodical, striking at range game. And let's not forget, Israel Adesanya's best weapon as the style bender that he is spamming leg kicks at range. Cannonier chewed up the legs of Whittaker in their fight. So I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya, landing leg kicks at range, doing very well at doing that. Whittaker tries to close the distance, lands a couple of good shots. I'm going to call a decision. I think Whittaker's not going to be so aggressively marching into punches, so I don't see him getting slept, but I do see him getting dropped in certain rounds, and maybe that's why Adesanya's going to win. He drops him in 2 of the rounds and clearly outlands him in 1 of the rounds to a 3-2 decision. I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya by decision, Whittaker being a bit more patient, not lunging as much, but I think that patience is arguably going to play into Adesanya's game. He arguably has to be aggressive, even though everyone calls that the problem with his first fight. You were too aggressive, you were lunging. The alternative is that he stays at range, and when people stay at range with Whittaker and be patient, they do very well against him compared to people that try and make it messy. So I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya, chopping at the legs at range, landing good shots when Whittaker comes in, and just keeping that range. He's got a massive reach advantage, and if he didn't have all of the advantages enough, he's on roids, got a breast out of nowhere in the middle of his 30s, nowhere near puberty, stays in physical peak condition, no rapid change of weight, no obesity. The only explanation is an extravenous source of roids going into his system, and I think that's what it is. It's very obvious. He blamed it on fucking weed. Massive breast growing on one side out of nowhere. Not a slight bit of puffiness to the nip. A massive lumpy breast. A C-cup out of nowhere. I ain't fucking buying anything. It hurts me that this is why I'm predicting him and a big reason as to why. But when you know someone's on some shit, how can you avoid... It'd be disingenuous of me to say, yeah, pick Whittaker. Whittaker's got a great chance. Maybe he could mix in the grappling. But Adesanya's good at getting back up. He's good at grappling. Jan Blachowicz kept him down in the later rounds of their fight. But early on in that fight, when Jan Blachowicz tried a couple of takedowns, Adesanya got back up. He's strong in those positions. Weirdly strong. Almost like he's on some shit. You know what I'm saying? So he gets back up despite being underweight early on against Jan Blachowicz. He got back up against Marvin Vettori. He's got very skinny hips. I could see Whittaker getting a body lock takedown, taking the back of Adesanya, but not body triangling, and just putting 2 hooks in on the back. and I can see Adesanya getting out of that because he's got such slim hips. He can turn out of those positions very well if he gets 2-on-1 with the wrist control. So I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya, getting back up after a couple of takedowns land from Whittaker, and I think Whittaker's going to be way more patient, and it's going to play right into Adesanya's game, and he wins 3 rounds to 2. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye. Toodle pip.